This week on the Eldritch Lorecast.
Nah, you're playing it wrong. Your fun is wrong.
A lot of hubbub.
You could go play Star Trek.
A lot of hoopla.
Wizards of the Coast have had a very strong Q1 2025.
You know what makes the medicine go down even better than sugar? Someone who wants the goddamn medicine.
There are dragons, and that is bad news.
I'm still disappointed.
Ben Byrne is an honorable man.
There's Oblivion, and that is bad news.
All that and more right now.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the cheeriest, most hopeful tabletop RPG podcast in all the realms. That's right, no dark fantasy here. We are all high fantasy 100% of the time. And if you know me, you know that's true. My name's Ben Byrne, and I am joined, as always, by Shawn Merwin, Dael Kingsmill, James Hake, and James with a question coming in from Gethin. What's the best bit to harvest from a dragon after you slay it?
I think it's got to be the heart of the dragon. That's the most mystical part. Ooh. That's the part where all the essence, all the spirit, all the blood is stored. There's got to be, if you've got a ritual, you better be eating that dragon's heart whole. Is what I'm saying.
Okay, all right. Intense. Shawn Merwin for the rebuttal.
Yeah, dragon's hearts, all they do is pump blood. It doesn't... What you need are the scales, because you can do things with the scales. Forget the magic mumbo jumbo. You take that scale, you make a shield, you make some armor. Hell, you make a sled out of it. You just go down that hill, put a little dragon blood on there to make it really slick, and you're sliding down that hill. That's what I'm about. I'm about the simple things in life.
Okay. Dael Kingsmill with the third argument.
I feel like what we have here is a balance between the sciences and the metaphorical arts. And I love a little bit of both. Because I'm a sucker for the film Dragonheart, where the dragon gives half its heart to the prince who grows up to be a baddie. And then if one dies, the other dies. Love it. Big fan. I'm a big fan of Flight of Dragons, where they have a specific gland that creates a spark that lights the fire, but it also enables them to fill themselves with gas so that they can fly. It has much less to do with the wings. I'm a fan of Dragon Age Inquisition, where you take the webbing of a dragon's wing to make high fashion. I think there are no bad options. Grind up a little bit of dragon's horn, do a line, see what happens.
Now we're talking.
Am I correct in saying that in Dragon Age, dragons are like a higher form of demon? Or did I make that up?
I see how you got to that, but it is wrong.
Okay. Yeah, right. The archdemon may look a lot like a dragon, but they're unrelated.
Oh, they're separate creatures.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, everybody knows the best part of the dragon to harvest is actually its soul. Absorb that up. Num, 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 num.
Skyrim.
Then you can shout real good. Yeah, exactly. Soak it up with bread.
I have just started playing the Oblivion remaster because I can't help myself. It's such a perfect thing to play in 10-minute breaks between reviewing drafts these days.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Well, Oblivion dungeons are so tiny, man.
Really? Okay.
I've never played much Oblivion. I probably played about 20 hours of Oblivion tops, with 5 false starts.
Right.
And I gotta say, going from Skyrim to Oblivion, some of these caves, they got nothing in them. They're all they're goblins and a couple of rooms and a chest and maybe a second half. But there's not a lot in it, which is totally bite sized. They're great for just playing when you need a refresh.
That's interesting because I have played every corner of Oblivion at least twice through and more, and would mount huge arguments as to why Oblivion is so much better than Skyrim. Skyrim is a quarter of the game that Oblivion is in my mind. But I haven't played Oblivion despite playing every corner of it twice and more. I haven't played it since I was 20 maybe. So whether my memory holds up to that, it's interesting to hear that the dungeons are small because my memory is kind of the opposite. But maybe that's just I'm remembering specific dungeons.
Yeah, you might be doing that because I've been playing totally random, just sort of wandering and stumble into a cave sort of dungeons mostly.
Sure. Trying to remember if Oblivion dungeons are still generative. I believe Morrowind dungeons were somewhat generative, so they'd kind of randomize what was in them. I think Oblivion was to some degree as well. So when you step through an Oblivion gate, depending on which one it is, sometimes it would just kind of randomly generate what was on the other side of that gate from pre-created assets, basically. And then there were others that were like very specific because they were like a story-driven gate or whatever. But anyway, Oblivion, amazing game. But this is a tabletop RPG podcast, so we are going to switch gears to talk politics. Yay!
Ben! Why do you do this to us, Ben?
Hasbro did an earnings call recently with Chris Cox, CEO of Hasbro, confirming that Wizards of the Coast is likely to not be largely affected by the import tariffs that the US are currently imposing on China and sort of suspended on the rest of the world, due to most of the D&D and Magic the Gathering content being printed within the US. So I suppose that's good-ish news for folks to know. The one notable exception to that is the D&D box sets, which are manufactured in China. And the one that we currently have coming up, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago in some detail, is Heroes of the Borderlands starter set, which looks very promising, but does look a lot more like a board game than previous D&D starter sets, at least in recent years. A price has not been confirmed on that. I think at the time we were predicting something in the vicinity of like $60 to $80 given the board gaminess of it. What do you reckon that box would cost just in like normal times? And what would you be willing to pay for it?
Past D&D starter sets, Dragons of Stormwreck Isle, D&D Essentials, Lost Mines of Phandelver, those were, if I remember right, Lost Mines of Phandelver was $20. Am I wrong about that? That's what I remember.
That sounds roughly right, $19.99, yeah.
Yeah. And so I don't think those boxes ever got more than $30, which means I would probably pay for a more board gamey one $40, $50.
See, I always kind of overestimate US prices, mainly because things are more expensive here in Australia, but that's partly because of shipping and also just a weaker dollar. What's the absolute ceiling? Like, is $50 the ceiling for you?
There isn't a chance in hell I'd pay more than 60.
Okay,
what
Shawn,
if it was 62? Huh?
Not a chance in hell.
I am what is known in the US as a cheap bastard. And so I probably wouldn't pay for one at all. Not because I wouldn't want it, but because I would find another way to get it. And I don't mean stealing.
Sure you don't.
But I would definitely get, say, the PDF version and see the content and so on. Now, I say that having every box set that's been created since like 3rd edition came out. So I will find my way to it. And how many of them
fell off a truck?
Just a couple. I have the truck too, if you need one.
Is that what that was? Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, okay, fair enough. I mean, they haven't announced a price yet, even previously or now, but it remains to be seen whether that price will be inflated as a result of the tariffs. They're probably not going to say whether it's inflated for that reason or not. But
in most cases, they put this out as a loss leader, knowing they're going to lose money on it anyway, but they are using it as a bit of advertising almost to try to get people to subscribe to D&D Beyond, to buy the core books, etc. So I don't think they're afraid of losing money. I think that is generally something that they expect for these box sets. But now you would have to even raise the price to, lose less money than you would have initially.
Also within that earnings call, Wizards of the Coast have had a very strong Q1 2025 compared to Q1 2024, with D&D/Magic the Gathering tabletop gaming sales up 51% from the same quarter last year. Chris Cox appears to lay a lot of this at the feet of Magic the Gathering as performing really well, but not for any specific set necessarily. Apparently, the Final Fantasy set that's coming is supposedly going to be one of the best selling just based on pre-orders, but saying that, a lot of people purchasing into the Magic the Gathering back catalog, things like that. Hasbro optimistic for Wizards of the Coast and Magic the Gathering during the uncertainty. Chris Cox saying that Magic the Gathering, and I'm paraphrasing here for the record, but Magic the Gathering has largely been resilient to economic pressures historically, and, quote, small luxuries are expected to do far better than other discretionary spending categories. I didn't look up those terms specifically, but I'm assuming that means, something that you can buy yourself for $5-10, whatever a booster of Magic cards cost. I think it's like $7 or $8 here in Australia, tend to fare better than like big expensive nights out or whatever.
Yeah. And it gets you. Let me tell you, it gets you. I was standing in a gaming store for just too long the other day, and I bought a Crimson Vow booster. I did. I don't need it. I haven't even opened it, but I wanted one.
I do wonder if D&D Beyond's 2D virtual tabletop, if D&D Beyond maps will see an improvement because, for example, WizKids minis, these plastic figures, they're printed in China, and my understanding is those will be subject to tariffs as well. The only sort of RPG exception that some publishers are doing their best to take advantage of is books. Books are exempt from these tariffs, whereas board games are not. And I reckon these plastic figures will fall under board games or a similar category.
Well, this is the exact discussion is like, are books exempt from these tariffs?
Books are, but are role-playing game books.
This is what we get for calling them tabletop role-playing games. This is what we get.
Because I can tell you right now, there will be places where these books come in and they will be tariffed.
Mm-hmm.
When is a book not a book?
Yeah, when some random customs dude says, oh, that's not a book. I know what a book is. I read one once. And that doesn't look anything like any book I read or the one book I read. So therefore, it is not a book. And therefore, I'm going to pay a tariff. Whereas the next guy down might let him through. It is a crapshoot. And if you're about to ship $1 million worth of material, you don't want a crapshoot. You want to know what's going on. So that's why we're seeing in the news later, to scoop Ben here, companies shutting down.
Tariff news.
Lightning round. Lightning effects. I'm sure that'll look better on the edit. Boardlandia Online, which is an online board game retail store, is shuttering due to tariffs imposing an unsustainable burden on the existing pressures on that company. This is just one retail store that I've heard of going out of business at the moment. I'm sure there may be others. CMON, similarly, folks who know CMON, they produce large tabletop board games. Now, it's fair to say that in CMON's case, from my understanding, the tariff situation could be A, the straw that's breaking the camel's back, or B, the scapegoat, because they've had some issues ongoing for the last couple of months. But CMON have laid off, my understanding, most of their creative staff and halted development on all future game development, blaming tariffs in their official statements as making their business untenable. They have about 10 in-progress Kickstarters at the moment that they are hopefully going to update folks on soon. And of course, we know that the folks behind Gloomhaven, I believe their second edition is currently, we mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, waiting in China because they cannot afford to bring it into the country. So they are sitting on that situation. And then last little bit of news here being that Stonemaier Games, known for Wingspan and Scythe predominantly, among other games, are joining a lawsuit to challenge the authority of the executive branch to impose these tariffs. Catalyst Games put out this blog a couple of weeks ago, actually, on April 22nd. It's just another breakdown of how it's affecting their business, but it's quite a detailed explainer. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but go check out their blog if you're interested in getting more details on their perspective. They publish games like Battletech, and they currently have Shadowrun. Yeah, I don't know if we have much commentary. A lot of this is going to be regurgitating stuff that we said previous weeks.
This is all I'll say. You know, this is a brutal situation for the people who make the games you love. And we have seen in here in America that unpopular decisions will often buckle to public outcry. Not always, but many recent political decisions from Washington have been reversed. And I don't think public outcry is all of it. Usually it comes when pressure from other elected officials or lobbyists or, you know, the money forces them to do it. But public outcry can impact those things. And if you hate what's happening here, if you hate the shuttering of companies because of these tariffs, because it becomes untenable to continue business in this environment, make some noise, right? If you're an American, call your representative, make sure that they know that this sucks. And if you're international, you just love games. If you're in Australia or Europe or wheresoever you might be, make noise online about it, right? I mean, this is the way that our voice gets heard and that we make change here in this industry. We may feel like we don't have a lot of power, but collectively, we have the ability to enact incredible change, even against people who seem to act with near authoritarian impunity on the executive level.
On that hopeful note, let's talk about some actual hobby news. Last week, we talked very briefly about the SRD 5.2 being released to the public. This week, I've had a little bit more time to pass through it. I haven't gone through it in like great detail or anything, but I've started using it in terms of writing stuff for Ghostfire Gaming. So I'm having flashbacks to, I don't know, 2019 or something, where I used to sit with the SRD open on one monitor while I was working on something on the other monitor and be going like, oh, is this magic item in the SRD? Can I actually put this in the thing? Are you all right, Dael? You didn't burn yourself or anything there?
I just sneezed really powerfully and only barely muted myself in time, but then my whole desk shook, so it wasn't worth it.
All right, fair enough.
I must say, I am far too busy with other games at the moment to do that kind of deep dive for D&D.
Well, I am not too busy because this is literally what I'm doing right now. And if I have to step back and look at it overall, I would say very happy. Very happy with what's there. If you had asked me, again, if you go back to second edition days, the ability to create D&D content and sell it, 20-year-old Shawn is overjoyed. Go back to the potential closing of the open gaming license a few years ago. This is about as good a outcome as we could have imagined. Everything's in the Creative Commons. They're putting out a bunch of content that we as game designers can use with no restrictions in terms of the game. Obviously, restrictions in terms of the intellectual property, but that's okay. Are there small things I wish would have been in the SRD? Sure. Are there things I'm sort of glad weren't in the SRD? Absolutely. Now, as a game designer who created content pre-SRD and now need to fix in, -4 weeks that content, it's work. But that's okay. It's good work. It's work as a game designer. I cannot complain.
Michael in chat asking if I'm disappointed about Bastions not being in the 5.2 SRD. That was on my wish list. I'll be honest, I can't be mad about it. Disappointed, maybe mildly. It was a fun new system that I think third parties could have had a lot of fun tinkering with. But, you know, much like Strongholds and Followers, I'm sure many third parties will create their own versions of Bastion systems that will be as good, if not an improvement, or just, you know, different in other ways.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. That's like my main standout thing from reading a bit about the differences between and what has come out in SRD 5.2 and Creative Commons. And it's, yeah, I'm not surprised at all that they wanted to just keep Bastions to themselves, partially because it's a new fancy thing that they can sort of keep as their toy. No, you're allowed to do that. That's fine. But also because it is also far more systemy than a lot of the other stuff that is being put in under Creative Commons with this. So it's already something that people can do very similar things just without this exact implementation of it. So it makes a lot of sense to me that it didn't show up in there.
I'm still disappointed. but I can't say it's a very reasonable disappointment, you know? With this new release, right? Bastions, I think, is the coolest new addition to the DM's repertoire in 2024. And I think the thing that this new rules refresh, we're still trying to pussyfoot around calling it a new edition. It's not really, but it's the newest addition to the toolkit. It's something that a lot of hubbub was made about, a lot of hoopla in the run up to it. And it's just, there's a disconnect there to me, right? We're making a big to-do about a brand new SRD for a brand new rules refresh. And a lot of the stuff that they put out to get us excited about the rules refresh isn't in there. And there are plenty of reasonable reasons why. We've talked about them. But I just can't shake that little disappointed itch kind of in my mind over it.
Can I shake the disappointment a little bit? With perhaps magical contagions. I was pretty happy they made it in. I was pretty happy. The magical contagions are kind of the new disease system. There's like 2 tiers of diseases now. There's like, you have poison, you have the poison condition and some extra negative effects while you are poisoned, which is kind of like baseline diseases. And anything that's immune or resistant to poison is immune or resistant to those diseases. It's kind of a streamlining of the rules. It kind of debuffs diseases even more when you start to think about it. But then in the DMG, and it's also in SRD 5.2, they introduced magical contagions, which are more difficult to remove. They're not impossible to remove. Some of them do say lesser restoration is enough to just get rid of this. But a couple of them, as they're written, and there's about 5 examples in the DMG, and I think 2 or 3 of those examples made it into the SRD. Kind of say that like you have exhaustion that cannot be removed by resting, and the only way to remove this magical contagion is to remove the exhaustion, which kind of creates a mechanic. That doesn't mean it's necessarily super difficult. There are ways to remove exhaustion, but it just means that it feels more like a disease that has a specific cure to it that you have to go through those steps of eliminating, rather than just kind of, cure disease or lay on hands or whatever. So I like magical contagions. I haven't used them a lot in my game yet, but I like that system. So I'm glad that they've put that in the toy box in some capacity.
That looks nice. I mean, cackle fever, sewer plague, and sight rot are all diseases from the 2014 DMG. It sounds like they've been reevaluated and changed a little bit, kind of in the way that the 2024 releases did for all of these things. And they've just been polished a little. I like that. I like it. The diseases in the 2014 DMG in many ways kind of felt like a legacy feature that they felt obliged to include. These feel like there's some thought put behind them. I like them. Yeah, they're pretty good.
Yeah, I agree. Can I also interest you in Goliaths making it into the SRD?
Delighted.
Which was a topic of much discontination in one of my earlier pre-Ghostfire. That probably wasn't a word. Pre-Ghostfire.
So close, though.
I like
discontination. Yeah, anyway.
It's like a magical contagion.
yeah, exactly. Put it in the book, because Goliath obviously is not like, it's not mind flayer, it's not illithid, it's not, Goliath is a mythical term, or I believe it originates from the Bible, originally David versus Goliath. But can you under the 2014 SRD put Goliaths in your D&D, because the term Goliath is not trademarked, but that specific description of Goliaths as kind of tall, ashen skinned, can you use that description? So I called them Titans in a publication that I did, but it was a very like wink and nod at the camera going like, oh, these Goliath-sized individuals, live in mountain ranges and blah, 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 blah.
Darrington Press and I did very much the same for Teldora Reborn, where we called them half giants. But they still had a lot of the aesthetic ideas of Goliath, because Grog from Critical Role is famously a Goliath, and he looks like a D&D Goliath. And so it's like, well, what can we do here? What's a way to be sort of in compliance without making a weird, legally motivated change to lore, right?
Mm-hmm. And then I made my own version of the half giant called the 3/8 giant.
Yes,
so it comes full circle.
And of course, I mean, MCDM have their version, the Hakan. There's always going to be the little sort of dance aroundings. I mean, lest we forget why they're called halflings in D&D and not hobbits.
Right.
But no, just to touch on something that James just brought up, it's one of my favorite things to track through. It's like, it makes me feel like an archaeologist when you look through the history of specifically Goliaths and Critical Role, because you sort of track through when they were doing a 4E game, then it turned into a Pathfinder game, then it turned into a 5E game, and then they became the biggest thing in D&D Internet, and then that impacted the whole rest of the game, and so then Goliaths had to come back, and then it was delightful.
Well, it's really interesting to me. I picked up from a little like neighborhood lending library box. I don't know if you have those over in Oz. They're very popular in sort of suburbs in America, right? And I just picked up a book called The Elven Bane, which is like a 70s fantasy paperback by by Mercedes Lackey, right? One of the classic names of paperback fantasy. And I was flipping through it. I wanted to read it because I've been reading a lot more novels lately. I want to read more older fantasy. And it's looking through and it's like, once there was a decadent regime of elves and dragons, but then the Elven Bane. And it's like, this is all so Tolkien derived, but with a sort of D&D-ish idea on it. And back in those days, elves and dwarves and humans and goblins and dragons were the sort of basis of what people might sort of derisively call generic fantasy. But now with books, with D&D 5e being so significant, and there's like these cozy fantasy books like Legends and Lattes, right? There are like tieflings in those books. There are dragonborn in those books because they're so clearly derived from modern D&D. I'm really curious to see, and now with Goliaths, right? I'm really curious to see how the modern D&D streaming sort of fantasy culture impacts books and broader fantasy fiction, because Tolkien might not be the foundation of fantasy fiction anymore. Might be D&D.
Were there any other, I didn't put them in the show notes. Were Arsama, are they in the 2024
Yes.
Player's Guide?
Mhm.
They are. Are they in the SRD? Does anybody know off the top of their head?
I don't
I
know.
feel like I would have noted that if they were, but
That's a great question.
Let's look.
I know
We'll
they
do it live.
removed half elf and half orc.
yes, they've removed half elf and half orc. Orc is now in the SRD as a species for whatever that's worth. As opposed to half orc.
I don't get why people are so pissed off about it.
Separate topic for another time, an ancient time at this point, I think.
Control F
also,
on the SRD does not return Azamar.
Okay.
Okay, that's interesting. Just a note as people are quickly searching through as well. If you are a third-party publisher or somebody who wants to make products for third parties, always check your SRD, because there are specific spells and there are specific monsters that are not in the SRD. Don't check the free basic rules. Check the SRD. Because I discovered, Banshee, not in the SRD. I discovered that recently. Wasn't in the 2014 one either. Now, Banshee's one of those things where you can call a stat block a Banshee because it's a mythological creature and you can give it whatever rules you want, but you can't use the monster manual Banshee. There are certain spells, a lot of the smite spells were not in 2014. I'm not going to go through and name everything that's in or out because we'd be here for the rest of the podcast and change, but just always check your SRD, double check to make sure.
And just as before, watch for feats too. There are very few feats in this SRD. They're mostly giving a couple of very basic examples so that you know what kinds of feats there are. They give the concept of feats to you, but you absolutely cannot go republishing willy-nilly Player's Handbook feats. You can't do that.
Well, I think that's stated in the OGL, and I think that, or it's stated somewhere, I remember reading this, and I think it's something that's worth keeping in mind for folks, is that the purpose of the SRD is not necessarily to allow you to republish the 5th edition rules.
Yeah.
It is to give you examples and language that you can use without worry in your product, but take the concept of feats and create your own feats as opposed to just recreating, the feats from the base rules. It does create annoyances when you want to reference those feats for, I don't know, like maybe a background or something. But just a random example I'm pulling out of my back pocket, Shawn.
Right. I'm sure that it didn't come up, say, within the last week or so, causing certain folks to not sleep.
And as Michael in chat is pointing out as well, that some things like spells or items are included in the SRD 5.2, but just have had their names changed away from an IP title. Their example is the Deck of Many Things becomes the Mysterious Deck. Often spells, this is the case because there are a lot of spells who are named after characters who exist within the D&D setting. And so they don't want to give you inadvertently a character. Wait, am I just remembering something that happened like a year ago where they inadvertently gave away Strahd?
Yeah.
Did that happen?
That was in the original SRD, the last SRD.
Too.
And they actually discussed that, saying that these things are provided as examples, not as permission to
Oh, great.
use.
Okay, good.
They do that now.
Near miss.
Woo! Dodged that one.
Yep.
Well, speaking of near misses, this episode did not miss any emails because we've got time to read a couple of them. So if you want to send your emails, hey Ben, where do you send your emails? Well, Ben, you send them to podcast@ghostfiregaming.com. That is the email address, and we will take them and read them out. That's how who talks? Sorry,
you. That's how you really talk.
That's how I really talk.
Ben's a fair and just host. He jumped this one on himself this time. Never let it be said that Ben is a cruel tyrant.
It would have been sad if he hadn't known.
It would have been great content if he hadn't known. Could have made a YouTube short out of that one.
I have often said Ben Byrne is an honorable man.
I do my best. Watching for daggers behind me. Anyway, Paul's question is asking about Westmarch style games. What game systems are great for a West style Westmarch style game. Preferably something, this is, we can go a little bit deeper, but Paul's initial question is asking preferably something rules light, easy to pick up, more micro role-playing than immersive character arcs, and works well with one-shots and episodic sessions. And to open this one, I actually had a question because I haven't played this game, but I've heard about it multiple times. Would Monster of the Week be a good kind of game for this?
In many ways, yes. The one thing that I think it misses on is that Monster of the Week, fairly explicitly in terms of character progression, is extended arcs.
Right.
It's,
Okay.
you know, yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing here. I think we need to define terms because a lot of people hear Westmarch style and they don't really understand what that term is supposed to mean at its core. So if you don't mind, Ben, could I go back and just fill in? Because I was one of those people. And when this question came in, I thought, let me get a definition here. And I went all the way back to the original blog by Ben Robbins from 2007, where he introduced this style. And there are really three things that these types of games are supposed to support, which is no regular time. Every session is scheduled by the players on the fly, and there's no regular party. So you could have 50 different players bringing characters into this campaign. Now, that he suggests 10 to 14 players, but you could obviously expand on that. And there's no regular plot. So the players decide where to go and what to do for each session, making it a sandbox game, but you have to introduce what you want to do to the DM so the DM has the time to prepare before the session. Mm-hmm. So with all that in mind, all the rules light systems that I'm familiar with, like Fate or like some of the Powered by the Apocalypse games like Monster of the Week, when you create your characters, you are creating bonds with those other characters. That's an important part of the game. So a Westmarch style game doesn't really support those games where those interactions with those characters are a part of your character. You could build them later, but it takes character creation and changes the way that it's meant to be done. The other thing to point out, this question asks about a rules light system. Ben Robbins talks specifically about using this system, using this campaign style for 3rd edition, which is definitely not a light system, which is definitely not an easy system to run. But it works because it is easy for the game master and the players to run the games almost automatically because the rules are so complex and they run themselves. So a rules light sort of DM making things up as they go along sort of game isn't actually supported by what Ben Robbins was thinking when he created this style of campaign. I will stop now.
Shawn, you stumbled on something that I think is at the heart of this issue here. You didn't stumble. You went there with purpose.
You deliberately excavated.
You drove with clear purpose there. You marched westward into that idea. Mm-hmm. The idea of the Westmarch is so clearly built around the game mechanics, right? I think the idea of the Westmarches came about yes, very clearly because there were too many players to have a normal small table game with, but also because these games that are being played are so mechanical, and that the idea of doing sort of high storytelling in them often winds up ignoring the mechanics of the game or kind of cleverly working around them, often to the game's detriment. Right? I think a 3rd edition D&D game where you're doing high court drama can work, but the game system is doing nothing to help you with it. If you're going to play a game like that, if you still want to stay in fantasy, play Daggerheart or play Fate or play something where the game system takes your hand in it and helps you through it. But that's why I would say a game like 3rd edition, for which it was originally designed, or even an OSR game. Shadow Dark has been mentioned in chat. I've never played Shadow Dark, but I have a hunch it would work great. I would love to see a game of Stars Without Number be played in a Westmarch's style. Do it like you're playing like Star Trek: The Lower Decks, right? Where none of you are the command crew of a starship, but every episode your starship has gone to somewhere weird, and you're a party of red shirts that have got to go down and lead this expedition. And many of you are probably going to die, but that's why you have these characters who may or may not ever form really strong relationships with each other. Look in an OSR mechanics forward, system forward direction where long-term storytelling is not a concern of the system.
Yeah, the games that came to my mind similarly aren't particularly rules light. I think that they are games that on the DM end are kind of easy to throw together because they are more focused on or can be more focused on the encounter and the immediately at hand kind of adventure that you're having rather than building out bigger things that are going on in the world. I think Draw Steel, could be a really interesting system for a Westmarch style game, even though it does have a lot of stuff in there that can lend itself to overarching character arcs. You could also very easily just go and fight the goblins, or whatever you happen to stumble upon in your spontaneous sort of session that you put together. Five Torches Deep, which is an OSR game that I think is quite specifically designed for that stuff. It does obviously lend itself to dungeon delving, but I think that you would very easily be able to apply it to other kinds of aesthetics if you wanted to. And then the only one that comes to mind that is weird, that might not even work, but I think it would be interesting to watch someone try, would be Westmarch's Dread.
Yeah, I was thinking.
Yeah.
Walk us through that one, Dael.
I don't know. It's only the beginnings. The rumblings. But it's like if you wanted to do a Westmarch's style world where you weren't invested in the characters having ongoing stories, you really could just
ongoing life, really.
Or ongoing life. You could come in, we're going to play tonight. And it's like, all right, let's do a thing and play through Dread. And you have one or two survivors, maybe. And they can come back and play those characters again should they decide to. But I think that could look interesting if you really were set on rules light Westmarches.
I had a similar thought, but I wasn't sure if it really counted as like Westmarches, strictly speaking, but doing something with Dread or Call of Cthulhu, possibly the Alien RPG if you like Alien as an IP and thought that would be good for that. Sort of horror themed. I think it was
10 Candles.
10 Candles. 10 Candles, okay. Doing something like that where the players are not expected to survive, or the characters aren't expected. Hopefully the players survive. The characters aren't expected to survive week to week. And so, there's no concern about like, you almost can't build ongoing like character arcs, right? That kind of go on and on and on and on. The history of like Cabin in the Woods style thing where the campaign's more about the story of this house and like what's happened in this house. Or is it, the story of a ship in Alien, if you were playing that as an RPG, doing something kind of horror themed in that way? Could be interesting, but I don't know if that's strictly Westmarch.
I think it starts to stretch the definition because one of the other definitions of Westmarches is the players can kind of reform in any combination depending on who's free that week. This is kind of an anthology campaign.
The information they learn is filtered back to the other players. So they know, okay, we don't need to go here because of what just happened. We can go in this direction. Or we'll go back there because there's another level to that dungeon.
Which is actually so vital, I think, to the current cultural understanding of Westmarches, maybe more than the original definition, in that I think a lot of people were introduced to the concept of Westmarches style games. There were a few different ways that people came to it. One of them was a Matt Colville video where he talked about it starting from the point of a party of players who would come back and draw, like they'd carve into a table a map and they would indicate where they had seen, there was another dungeon over here, but we didn't go and do it, and blah, blah, blah. And so that idea of the shared information is kind of core in a lot of ways.
Could you do it sort of using the Alien RPG, but it's like the ship logs? So if you have something where people don't survive, it's like you keep checking the ship logs to learn what has happened over time aboard this ship as that travels around places.
Well, any game that has that mercantile, you're just hired help that's going off on a mission.
Sure.
You could definitely work that. Just Alien, for me, Alien is so hard to put into a campaign frame because of the media that introduced it. It is
Sure.
If you have more than one person surviving an Alien game, to me that's not an Alien game.
Yeah, you got to do it more Star Trekky.
Nah, you're playing it wrong.
Exactly.
Your fun is wrong.
Exactly. and by that point, you could go play Star Trek.
James Hake is working on the Space Trucker game.
This is true.
That would be this. So.
Yes.
And the idea of that, because a lot of that game that's still very much in development is based on Ice Road Truckers, the American reality TV show. One of the big sort of social elements of that show is that it's people who are just going from a common dispatch, right? And these truckers form relationships, but it's dependent. The drama of the episode is dependent on who is out on the road at a given time. Some seasons, a trucker has gone home. They didn't come back this season. They took another job. They retired. And so if you've got a variety of people who are out there working the ice road, working the dark space lanes in this game, that will very much change the dynamic between the different players.
Well, we've solved it, Paul. And
the answer is depends on what you mean by Westmarches.
Well, speaking of solving things, Antonio emailed podcast@ghostfiregaming.com and also asked a question, as is the purpose of that email address. And their question was, how much setting lore/background information do you give your players, particularly when you're starting a new campaign? To make sure that their characters feel immersed in the world, that the world feels immersive, but that you're not just lore dumping information that the players, are going to get drowned by, and everything just becomes grey noise or white noise or noise of some color or description.
So, I am someone who I'm sure people know. I like building out a little bit of lore. I love to do that. I also am so familiar with the plight of no one wants to read this. No one wants to read this. So I really try to bake it down to its essentials. And I think I'm pretty happy with where I tend to get to now ahead of stuff where, it depends on how a campaign is starting, right? Like if I'm starting with a campaign pitch where I'm saying, hey, do you want to play in this game? Here's the idea for the campaign. Then I will try to sort of condense everything into a couple of paragraphs. And it'll really be like, just the points of tension or questions. It's like every other thing, even if it's the coolest, most favorite thing that I've come up with, I don't need to tell you about that. I need to put in the idea of like, these are the tension points that are going to come up. This is the genre that we're playing in. Does that sound cool? And ideally, I like to pair it with a piece of artwork that I have found, not via AI. And I've gone, hey, this is the vibes. Do you dig the vibes? Hey, there you go. And then the other mode, which sometimes is where I start with, or sometimes it comes after that, is once players kind of have an idea of what they want to play. For players like, I kind of want to like try out Warlock. I've never played Warlock. It seems fun. I think I'm ready for it. I'm a new player. I've been avoiding the spellcasters, but now I really want to try being a Warlock. Then I will kind of there's like a do-si-do that you do around what they're looking for and what stuff in your world might be interesting to them in that regard. And I toss it in and out as I want, but I really want to keep it. It's so easy to say, keep your information to a page, keep your information to half a page, keep your information to X number of paragraphs, but really in a big way, the smaller it gets or the more visual it gets, the better, because it just makes it more palatable. Hey, a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down, and people will be interested. And people are also, I think, more likely to be interested in your lore if it comes up in conversation with them about their character that they're going to play, and they are invested in that character. And so in that dialogue back and forth, you can kind of feel out what information is and isn't relevant to them rather than just spewing an unending diatribe of stuff you've come up with that you think is cool, even though it's really hard. Find a friend who's not playing in the campaign. Find a DM friend who's not playing in the campaign and be like, these are all my ideas, because your players don't want to hear it as much as that sucks.
You know what makes the medicine go down even better than sugar? Someone who wants the goddamn medicine.
Ah.
And why do they want it? Because it affects their characters. Either their character's backstory or the character's forward moving story. So don't tell them about the history of this world. As Dael said, put up a picture and say your characters enter this building and the first thing they see is this picture. And if they start asking, what's in the picture? Why is the dragon talking with the saint? Why are they doing this? They're asking you. They are more receptive to the answer. Put those characters in a position where, in order to continue the story, they need to ask those questions. Then they will want the answer. They will be more receptive to the answer. And you will get the cool stuff out in a much more palatable way than a lore dump, a document, interpretive dance, or anything else that you could use as a medium to deliver it.
And the reason why that's true is because the staid becomes dramatic in that situation, right? Lore is textbook, right? We do not feel a sense of drama reading a textbook. But if you were to dramatize that history, right, you would have more fun watching Hamilton than you would probably reading a biography of Alexander Hamilton. That's why that medium exists. Right? You can make a novel out of history. You can make historical fiction. You can make a dramatic biography. But a play must be dramatic. You would not watch someone go on stage and dictate history to you. I guess, though, some YouTube channels do somewhat have that vibe to them. But the real thing here is games like D&D, which do not do any work to help you do this stuff, you can do whatever you want. I say go for the drama. Games like Daggerheart, for example, or like a Powered by the Apocalypse game or Forged in the Dark, create sort of more of a handshake of drama between player story and what is going forth in the GM's conception of the story. And that tries to forward this idea that Shawn was talking about here, where the only lore that matters to the players is the lore that impacts them. And so if you're playing a game that is not offering you that handshake, if you're playing D&D or you're playing an OSR game or something like that, you've got to assume that the only person who cares about that lore is you. You might be pleasantly surprised to find that that is different, but you got to go into it assuming that this is all fun between games for this person right here.
Especially when you're at, because I was literally just had my first session of a new campaign a couple of weeks ago, and we're doing Citadel of the Unseen Sun, and I've just finished dev editing a chapter on the lore of Astoya, and very tempting to just dump that on the players and be like, no, but you have to understand the conflict between Ravo and Soma, and you have to understand that there's all these other provinces in between them, and they all have their own history and everything, and knowing the differences between this province and the cultural differences and how they like to eat their eggs is very important, you know. No, it's not.
Well, it can be if it's dramatic. If you make it so, yeah.
but only if it's relevant.
Right, exactly.
Let the campaign tell the story of the world.
Yep.
Don't feel like every detail needs to be known, even if it is going to be relevant later. Keep it until it is relevant. You know, I think we were talking about Oblivion and Skyrim before. When you start Skyrim, all you know is that you're a dude in a wagon with your hands tied, right? And you're about to get executed. You don't even really know what a Stormcloak is. You probably know there's dragons in the game because it was part of the marketing. And when that first dragon rocks up, you're like, oh, sick, there's a dragon. But you don't know about like High Hrothgar or whatever that place is called. You don't know what the cities are called. You don't know the name of the province you're in. You don't know any of that stuff. But you learn it and kind of absorb it by exploring the world. So I think the only things that need to be explained at the start of a campaign are what is relevant to the characters in the immediate moment of right now, what is relevant to their character if it's not relevant in the immediate moment of right now, and then let them find what they think is exciting by exploring the campaign and introducing that stuff as it becomes relevant. The only very slight caveat to that is maybe providing a little bit more lore context when a choice needs to be made. Do you want to go down into the Stillborn Forest, or do you want to go across to Riven in the Black Mire? Well, what's the difference between those two? Okay, bog swamp with undead in it, deep forest with werewolf vampires. Could be all you need to get them to be like, oh, vampires that are werewolves, let's go there. You don't need to give them the history of how they eat their eggs.
Skyrim is an interesting example to bring up here because I think the Elder Scrolls as a series, great, full of really interesting lore. I think the lore of Elder Scrolls is fascinating. However, I think its delivery is often abysmal because it's full of these books. It's got so many texts. In order to get the lore of Skyrim, I think Skyrim's lore is very interesting, but its delivery in dramatic beats is god-awful. I think it's apparent by how many people just straight up skip the main quest of Skyrim. It just goes to show how generally poor their lore delivery is, because all of the interesting stuff, all of the weird metaphysics of the Elder Scrolls, of Tamriel, of Nirn, of godheads and Kim, and all of these things, all of these incredibly interesting metaphysical concepts, they're in textbooks, man. And it's cool to think about, but never does it really show up in the actual games in dramatic ways. See,
I was thinking Skyrim is an interesting one in terms of, by the end of the tutorial, I think you do know about 3 things. You're like, okay, well, here's this guy who is the leader of the Stormcloaks. I don't know much about the Stormcloaks, but they've gone, that guy's our leader, and he's been captured by the Imperials. So you're like, okay, Stormcloaks, Imperials are enemies. And this he's gagged because he's got something called the Voice. I wonder what that could be. And then they don't tell you anything else. They're like, there's a dragon. Don't really look. There's bears, giant spiders. There's just a lot happening. You'll find out the rest later. But those are like the 3 intro things they give you for that specific game in terms of lore. And then the rest of it you pick up as you go and as you choose where your character is going to lead and what books you're going to pick up off the shelf and read. But I think that in itself, that little thing, is a really good bit of advice. If you have all this great lore, you can have so much and it's all so juicy. Pick the 3 juiciest things. What are the 3 juiciest things? Automatons are coming to life, and that's why we have Warforged. There's too much magic around, so the local druids are looking to burn the whole city to the ground because they're sick of it and it's polluting the natural environment. Also because there's too much magic around. Now we've got X-Men style sorcerers popping up out of nowhere who have magic and they don't know how to use it. 3 things, they're all tied to one overarching thing. There's too much magic. Here are 3 things that have caused it. That's the premise. That's all anyone needs to know. And then as people start making characters, you don't have to tell everyone about the magic universities that are around. You tell the player who's decided that they are an academic. You tell them and you answer their questions. You don't give them too much, like Shawn was saying.
Talking about Oblivion as well, I think what Skyrim and Oblivion both do very well in their very short intros, everybody remembers Patrick Stewart being, and then you must close the jaws of Oblivion, or whatever he says. It gives you the stakes of the whole game straight up. Skyrim, there are dragons, and that is bad news.
They're back.
Oblivion, there's Oblivion, and that is bad news. And that's what we need to, that's the thing we need to stop, and this is going to be an adventure about that, which I really like. I'm not necessarily saying you have to give the exact stakes at the start of your campaign, but I do like how it's very economic in delivering the stakes and kind of the goal. The other thing to agree with you, Dael, is something that I did try to do in this recent session that I run was, all right, here's my first paragraph of the room of the world. Astoria is the sun never rises, is ruled by vampires. That's what you need to know. Second paragraph, you're currently in a dining room. You're meeting with one of the members of the Crimson Court. They tell you this. Now, these 3 things you need to know. X, this guy wants you to do this. This person wants you to do that. And you have a decision to make between these 2 people, or whatever it is. But just 3 or 4 things, because players will only remember 3 or 4 things, and really flat, like signposting. If you don't listen to any of my purple prose up until this point, in a dining room, got it. That's all I need to know. That's fine. But just remember these 3 things, because these are going to be the things that you make decisions on, and really flagging that for the players. keeping track of answers that you give to players, because if you give an answer to a question and then 6 sessions later or even 2 or 3 sessions later, you don't remember what answer you gave to a random question, but a player wrote it down or whatever, you end up in trouble. I would say that for all that, I'll speak for myself, but I assume this is true for maybe Dael at least, is that you, even if you're only giving players the bare minimum of what they need to know because that's what they're interested in, yeah, you still write a lot if that's what you want to do, like you can create that bigger world behind the scenes.
For sure.
And that's what makes it feel like a deep, real place, is the players are swimming up on the surface, but anytime they want, they can swim down and you've got the answers for them. You will come across, they're a bit of a golden unicorn for DMs, but you will come across those players that want to Wikipedia your world and be like, well, I want to know can I just, like, between sessions go and read all the context? I want to know where my character's from. I want to know what they like for breakfast. I want to know how they scramble their eggs. I want to know, who their parents were. I want to know would they have been farmers or, you do come across those places. So you can still write that stuff, but the delivery mechanism is economic, needs to be economical.
Are you
for players who don't care?
Because there's a lot of egg talk.
There's a lot of eggs.
you need some protein.
Maybe I might need some protein.
I want to add that between these two poles, this mythical unicornian lorehound and the player who doesn't give a damn about anything other than the decision they're making right in front of them in that second, there is a center point of players who just want to know that you know the answer.
Yeah.
They just want to feel like you've got the answer, and they don't need to know anything more than that. You could hand them your 100-page handcrafted setting guide and they wouldn't read a word of it, but they would feel at ease knowing that you wrote a 100-page setting guide, and that if they bumped up into one of the edges of your campaign world, you'd be like, aha, you stumbled upon very dramatic lore here.
Keith Baker talked to my world building class last week, and I just want to point out that even
you buried the lead there, Shawn.
Even
Come on.
even during that contest that they held, right? The first stage was 1 page. Your world was 1 page. Even after you made it to the semifinals, it was only like 10 pages. It wasn't 1,000 pages. It wasn't. Right? It was 10 pages, and with that, they could pull out the good parts to recognize that there is brilliance within these words. So 100 pages was the final. It might have even only been like 50 or 20, but it's enough. It's enough to know that you've got a brilliant world there waiting.
And then lastly, Pat's pointed out much earlier in chat, there's always the inviting players to add to the world, which I think is great to do at the start of a campaign in particular. What I did recently, again, with that session I ran, was I was like, all right, you're having dinner with the Crimson Court, with a member of the Crimson Court, you've been invited. So why has your character been invited? You tell me, especially because I don't really know your characters yet. And B, who else is at that? What NPC is at that dinner that you've come with or that you know? And that allows them to introduce a character into the world that I'll role play and kind of take over from them to be part of the world, but they feel like they've contributed to it. And it also helps anchor their character into the scene because they're there with someone. They have a reason to be there that the player has invented and doesn't require a lore dump from the GM to be like, you've come with this person and they're important because of X, Y, Z, the player knows. And look, to be fair, you have players that go in both directions where, some players don't love that being invited to create stuff for the world because they're there to play the game and they feel a little put upon when they're like, oh, I have to invent something. No, I'm here to, you tell me. So just, accommodating for both of those situations and everything in between, important. But I think inviting players to add stuff is great because, I had a monk who was trained at a monastery that they invented, and then that monastery ended up becoming an important kind of part of the world that would be referenced by other NPCs and things. And that it lets the players feel immersed in the world without feeling like they have to do homework necessarily. Mm-hmm. Speaking of doing homework, there's none for this episode because we're here every week and you'll be able to join us again next week. So the only homework you have is to like, subscribe, thumbs, stars, stuff get your stuff in. Watch out for them double yokers.
Oh, yeah. Unless, of course, you're Dante. Dante also has homework.
Dante does have homework.
Not this week.
Actually, yeah. If you want to catch us before Dante does the homework, though, you can do that live on Twitch, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on a Monday. If you're in Australia on the East Coast, it is 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. Thank you, Shawn. Remembering my own time zone then. We will be back next week. We're here every week. Catch us on YouTube, Spotify, all the good places. Likes and thumbs and stars and stuff. We'll be back next week. I've been Ben Byrne here with Dael Kingsmill, Shawn Merwin. That's James Hake. Dante's the editor. We'll catch you next week. Cool.